Good morning, lovely. So the last in a series looking at form for GCSE English Literature Poetry, whether you're studying unseen poems, whether you're studying anthology poems. So today we're looking at London, which is one of the anthology poems in Power and Conflict for AQA. And I'll be doing two short videos looking at the differences for different exam specifications as well afterwards. So they're kind of additional rather than important watching. So if we remember from the last video, we were looking at the steps that could help us when we're looking at form, and those really come down to four things that we need to do. So first we need to look at a range of interesting aspects of form, like having a look at the poem as a whole, unpicking aspects to do with how many syllables on each line, what words rhyme, which ideas are in which verse, whether there's any interesting caesure or enjambment, if words have been left dangling at the end of one line or at the beginning of the next, looking at the rhythms, whether they're harmonious or not, looking at the rhyme schemes, and so on. Sometimes as well we'll find internal rhymes and things like that. So there could be lots and lots of things that a poet can do with the form of the form of the poem, the way they've set the words out on the page, that can help them present their ideas. So when we've identified a range of those, I'm really looking for sort of 9 or 10. What I'm then looking for are the big ideas of the poem and what the poem's really about, what the poem's the feelings in the poem are, what the mood is, those kind of things. And then I pick out one or two aspects of form that help the writer, the poet, convey that idea. So in London, we're really looking at his anger and frustration about the inhabitants of London and what's happening to them. And really in the form, I'm looking for ways in which he's conveying those ideas through the form. And towards the end of this video, we're going to be looking at how to make a brief summary, because I don't expect you to write an essay for every single poem in your anthology. That would be ridiculous. So you're going to have a look at maybe one or two, but then what you do need to do is think about, okay, well, what are the key ideas, and have something that's useful for your own revision. So I'm going to show you how I did that at the end. So we've got London here by William Blake, and we start with I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames doth flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweeps cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plague the marriage hearse. Very different than neutral tones that we looked at in the last video, even though it's doing lots of the same things. And if you look back at the previous video, all I've done is alter a few of these because a lot of it is going to be the same. So like neutral tones, even though they wouldn't be two that would compare because they're in different parts of the anthology, we've got 4 lines and 4 stanzas. So something they're very traditional, one of the most common forms of poetry. You know, if you ask a year 6 what poems look like, that's what they'll say they look like. And each stanza contains a range of ideas, which was not like neutral tones, which really just only explored 1 or 2. Unlike neutral tones, it's also heavily rhythmic, so I wander through each chartered street, and you've got Blake there using the very metered, metronomic kind of rhythm there. That's like the metronome just setting through and marking each beat of each word. We have a different rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B. I don't think that's particularly important. And there was a sense that for this one in particular, it was very hymn-like or nursery rhyme-like. It feels to me very much like a poem that's supposed to be read aloud. And if you look at lots of other works by Blake, though with songs of innocence and experience like Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, those kind of poems have that kind of childish feel to them in lots of ways, like a piece of writing we would perform with a child. Lots of his other poems are not like that at all. And a quick look through some of his longer poems and you'll see exactly what I mean, that he's not somebody who uses this verse form exclusively in his writing. So for me, the big ideas in a poem, I've just picked out 2 quotes that really summed it up for me. I think that blights with plague I like as well. The mind-forged manacles always strikes me as interesting in this poem, and the idea of being charted, particularly in terms of the form and the structure. So what I was thinking this poem was about was that sense of being trapped or confined, that you were imprisoned by your own shape. And charted very much means like owned. It's as if every single piece of something like even like the River Thames is owned and controlled. Since a real lack of freedom with the mind forged manacles, that's something that we do ourselves. It's not necessarily that we're being oppressed by the forces, the state, by the church, by the palace, but really that we create those manacles ourselves, that we have the ability to free ourselves and we don't. But there is a sense too that of being heavily controlled. He mentions the church, he mentions the palace, that we're very much kind of victims of them, if you like, and that they have that guilt is all over them, that they should feel responsible. And we get his sense of anger, his own frustration with people, that really feels that people don't realise that this is happening to them. That he's talking about the big ideas such as society and what society is like, what civilization is like now, and talking about big things. I mean, Blake very interested in the French Revolution and liberty and brotherhood and equality and those kind of big ideas too. And you get a sense of very things not being equal in this poem, that there's a sense also of exploitation. You see, there's so many big ideas that we can start to pull out of it. And I also thought there was some, not linked to those big ideas I've discussed already, but there are lots of biblical images. I find that quite often in Blake. It's quite like a prophecy in lots of ways. And things like the marks of weakness and marks of woe, very Old Testament biblical in lots and lots of ways. So that's another thing that I could pick out. See, if I wanted to, I could get quite a lot of mileage, I think, out of the idea of it being almost like a hymn or a chant, and then tying it into ideas of those biblical images in there as well. But that's not where I'm going today. So this was my paragraph. And so this is what I said. So the simplistic form of London by William Blake, coupled with a strong rhythm and rhyme scheme, means that it allows the listeners or readers to focus on the main ideas. Like, we're not getting interested or tied down by thinking about the form, really, are we? That's what I meant there. Particularly as each stanza seems to have a kind of crescendo towards the end. And I know I'm talking about structure there. That's going to happen. I've talked about that before. We can't separate form, structure, and language artificially from each other. They all work together. In particular, the build-up to the mind-forged manacles in the second stanza, for instance. The use of repetition helps, and repetition against structure, helps us identify Blake's anger and frustration with the words around him, from the church to the state, but also to the people who seem to be unwilling and unable to break free of their own restraints. This simple form allows him to strongly emphasize those ideas. Like, it's a bland little car, isn't it? A bland little vehicle for him to carry those very, very powerful and big ideas. And I went on to say, we may, however, see that the poem itself is constrained by the lines, like the Thames and the people is charted and manacled, constrained by the metre and the rhyme scheme. It's all within that very clear, clearly engineered structure. Nothing breaks out of it. The words, like the people, are heavily marshalled and restricted, echoing in more subtle ways Blake's ideas about how we're all bound and restrained. So that would be the kind of paragraph I may be writing in the exam. And you may want to write about different things. That's the whole beauty of poetry. It's all very much about what we think about it. It's whether we can justify it or not. Now, that kind of approach, though, is not useful for all of your poems. So say, for instance, you've got 15 poems in your anthology. To think about it, to study it, so say, for instance, you're spending 15 minutes on each poem. It's a lot of time. And you're going to have to do the same for structure and language too. So what I wanted was something more simple. And this is why I came up with a kind of 25-word statement, because I can't say it in 25 words. It's not worth saying. And so what I've got here are the kind of the key aspects of form that I want to talk about, the key subject terminology. So, and you'll see, I'm not being overly sophisticated with my use of vocabulary there, and that's fine. It's how I'm talking about it and how I'm writing about it that's important. So I said simplistic traditional four-line form and strong rhythm help Blake emphasise how the inhabitants of London are all imprisoned either by themselves or by other powers. And from that 25-word statement, what I'd then be able to do in the exam, say for instance London came up, then I would be able to expand on that idea and turn it into a full paragraph. So if you imagine it, I always imagine it a bit like juice. That's a bit like the cordial, isn't it? Like put some water into it and dilute it, but that's the essence of it. That's the essential bit. So that's something that I would do for each of the poems, is have that 25-word statement. It needn't be a full sentence, and it needn't be phrased as a full sentence either, but something, you know, fairly simplistic that I can remember the main bits of, so that when I go into the exam and I open up the exam paper and there is London, then I'll have the key things that I want to talk about, without getting bogged down and relying then on the fact that William Blake uses an ABAB rhyme scheme and there are 8 syllables on each line, you know, which is not, it's not meaningful, and those aspects don't, maybe they do, you'd have to justify to me if you've got a good explanation. I'd love to hear it, but they're not for me the things that stand out as being important about the form as how they help Blake convey his main messages. And when we go into the exam, and I see so many students do this, that they feel the need to describe everything in the poem. This is iambic, whatever it is, not pentameter, because there are only 8 syllables, using an ABAB rhyme scheme, and the lines are end stopped, and there's no use of caesura and enjambment. Pretty much you can train anybody to pick out anything. I've got a dog who can pick out the ace of spades in a deck of cards, and I'm pretty sure if I wanted to, I could train her to pick out the word like and to say this is a simile. Well, not to say she's a dog. So do you know what I mean? It's not helpful to just being able to say feature spotting. This is this, this is this, this is this, this is this. Even if the writer uses anapes and dactylic meter, and that's not helpful, even if you're writing about things that sound complicated, because it's just a fancier way of spotting, a feature spotting. It's no different really than saying there are 4 lines. So it's what we do with that. And I think for me, a lot of students rely on describing things in the exam because they've forgotten what the main message is, and that the form needs to support the main message. And they know they have to write about form. It's one of the little things that they put at the top of the page: form, structure, language, context. And they tick it off when they've done it. So you want to write about form. It's just remembering the key ideas and how they fit together. And I think that's why we rely on spotting the obvious things rather than going for the main thing, the most useful thing. So for me, that process of writing that 25-word statement should be very much about thinking, what's the big idea? What's the one thing about form that really supports the writer in conveying that big idea? And what can I do in the most simple way to help me remember that in the exam? So that, for me, would be the main thing that I'm trying to do for my revision for each poem for the anthology, is to get it down to a bare minimum. Okay, so in the next videos we'll be looking at structure, and we'll be looking at doing a similar kind of approach, identifying the features, looking at how they fit with the big idea, thinking about how we could write about structure, and then thinking about how we can revise it in a much more simple way.